welcome to the Academic Canuck podcast. Thank you for joining me for this episode today, episode 3, and I'm really excited for what we have on tap for today. First things first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like the content I am putting out. If you don't, I don't know, go pound sand, I guess is the expression. That's all I can say. I usually have a coffee with me whenever I do these podcasts, and I see some of the bigger podcasts, they have all these coffee sponsors like Black Rifle Coffee. I'm representing No Name Coffee today. No Name Coffee. Why? Because you're fucking broke and that's all you have. So that's my little plug for today. So today, episode 3, what I wanted to talk about is, it's called the Laurentian Enigma. The Laurentian Enigma. It's really what I wanted to talk about in episode 2, but another topic came into frame, and I needed to talk about that with regard to woke publishing. And in some ways, I would say, it ties into this topic we are looking into, and that's the story around Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, and its issues with insolvency. What I hope to do with this episode is unpack the story and give a brief and succinct abstract to what the problem is, unpack some of the themes within the story, look at the issues that might have led to this, and ending on the implications this has for higher education, not only in Canada, but potentially in North America. So I think it's important first to just give some background on Laurentian University. It is, so it's a public university located in Sudbury, Ontario. If you are outside of Ontario or Canada, Sudbury is a city in Northern Ontario. I believe it is the largest city in Northern Ontario. I do believe so. I would say roughly 6 or 7 hours north of Toronto. It is known, I guess, as a blue-collar town or city, known for its mining and forestry, especially its nickel mining. And it's a large bilingual city, actually, with a mix of English and French population. It has actually a substantial Franco-Ontarian population, and Laurentian University itself is built as a bilingual public university. So, due to its large contingency of French speakers, both within the student population and faculty population. I know they have being in the education field especially, I know they have a pretty popular consecutive French education program, L'École des Sciences de l'Éducation, where a ton of students go, especially if they want to learn French in school, and for schools, especially in the K through 12 sector. And they do not want to go out of province. They do not want to go to Quebec for schooling. They want to stay in province and pay in province tuition, so to speak. So there's a little background of the school itself. Moving on, I want to provide a brief abstract to what is going on with Laurentian University and its issues with insolvency. So as a short abstract, I guess we can go as far back as February 1st, where, and I'll post, as a side note, I'll post links in the description of all the news links that talk about Laurentian in reference to this podcast. So it was a Northern Ontario CTV News reported that due to long-term debts and lower revenue stemming from COVID-19, that Laurentian University filed for court protection from creditors, or in other words, it became insolvent. What is insolvent, of course, is the inability to pay off debts, and in most cases, the inability to borrow any more money, leading to bankruptcy. So that's what insolvency means. I guess in a nutshell, That is the main story. A public university has filed for bankruptcy, which is a big story considering a public university that relies on high cost tuition and public funds could not possibly borrow any more money or refinance. Nothing just filed for bankruptcy. So this story started getting some traction, especially in the provincial and national news headlines, in a story that was done by TVO, that's Television Ontario, our public access media source here in Ontario, states that Laurentian cites years of operational deficits, holding almost what does it say here? Almost 100 million in long-term debts. Okay. This brings into question that 100 million would seem to rely more on long-term debts than the COVID-19 pandemic, given universities were still operational and tuition rates were not cut during the pandemic. I would know, of course, I was completing my master's during the start of the pandemic. There was no reduction in tuition. So from personal firsthand experience, there was no reduction in tuition, in tuition charge. So I would say this is more of a long-term issue rather than a short-term issue. But perhaps it was the pandemic, that was the quote-unquote death knell to this school's operation. In terms of its funds. So, I guess looking deeper with this, let's look at some of the themes here from reading the stories around Laurentian insolvency. Well, first we have the real world implication of debt and lack of management in terms of money. We also have the irony that many students would love to file for insolvency from their student loans, but obviously cannot, even though the burden of a degree is larger than previous, with a lack of availability with jobs and rising tuition costs. Also, I guess a side note to point out here is Laurentian is one of the most heavily subsidized schools in Ontario. They receive a lot of taxpayer dollars in the form of grants and tuition fees, predominantly student loans, which are, again, government funds. So they receive a large proportion of government subsidy compared to other schools. So that's important to keep in mind as we move forward. Other themes that this provides is, the nature of universities and their operation, I guess, as an organization. Perhaps it is certain characteristics of a university, especially in the last 2 decades, I would say. This reflects, that Laurentian is not the only culprit of this, so to speak. There are other places that use this model of this kind of reliance on debt and refinancing debt to keep borrowing and to get these subsidies to make up costs, so to speak. So it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, moving forward. Today is the first day of March that I'm recording this. The fact that to see if certain dominoes fall, I guess, in terms of other universities. There are, I would say, a lot of areas to unpack here. It's a very complex issue regarding the story. I look towards our college and university minister, Ross Romano, who suggested that this is a concern that has been prevalent at this particular institution. Again, that was reported by the Canadian Press on February 14th, that deficits ran as far back as 2014. This brings in some questions. First, why wasn't this observed, action, and remedied, especially before 2021? If it seems like it was known, like this has been a concern for some time now. And this particular institution that Minister Romano says, can we be sure this is the only institution? If there's similar business models running for most universities, can we be sure this is the only institution? So those are some questions I think that are that might need to be observed moving forward. I guess the reason for that second question is where you see the structuring models of other universities, and I kind of did some work on this throughout my master's degree, and even have a preprint published about policy in school. A lot of these policies reflect the nature of the university, and a lot of the nature of universities, especially in Ontario, are similar. In how they're structured in terms of governance and management. It could be that Laurentian is in a league of its own, but for the college and university administered, it could be true, or it could be an attempt to do some, catastrophic cleanup in case of this is in case other universities come to the forefront in terms of their debt. This, of course, led to a bevy of questions from alumni, students, faculty, even the community up in Sudbury about what was going on at Laurentian, notably donors who wanted to know where their investment has gone. Details are still a little murky, especially since it currently is in Ontario court right now, where they just ruled that program cuts, faculty furloughs are allowed for restructuring, and that's according to a CTV article. This has also introduced talks on some, I guess an introduction of provincial oversight, where the Conservative government is looking into, all the finances for all universities in Ontario. Okay. That is the one thing, perhaps necessary, but can bring problems, especially if this precedent is met. Especially as introducing, is this a problem in all universities? But first, I want to outline and shift this to Canadian politics a little bit for just a moment here. So the Conservative government is looking into passing something that looks into all the finances of universities in Ontario. Let me outline what Laura May Lindo, an NDP, which is a New Democratic Party, member of Parliament, said with regard to the insolvency issue in a CBC special investigation. Quote, "This is a broader issue. Those cuts were not things that the sector could easily walk away from or pick themselves up from," in reference to her comments on providing more sustainable funding to universities like Laurentian. Essentially, what she is saying right here, through poor organizational management from school leadership and, as I previously stated, receives a large sum of funds from taxpayers as it is, wants more money to come from the taxpayers to pay for organizational mismanagement. This is why the NDP will never win a federal election and are struggling in some provinces in their provincial elections. Absurd fiscal policies like this. I won't go on a tangent, perhaps. In future episodes, I can do a political one relating to all the parties in Canada. I'll do one on Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, heck, maybe even Bloc Québécois, Green Party. But this is, that is an absurd fiscal policy and a response to this issue. But let's get back on track here a little bit. What we can observe is that there are larger, more implicative issues at play here that go deeper beyond insolvency or fiscal spending or public emergency. There is a through line of issues here that really need to be addressed in relation to Laurentian University, and here they are. I've pointed out three. First, you need to address the aged growth model of all universities. So the way universities have been running, I would say, since the post-war era, arguably the post-war era or the Cold War era. Modern characteristics of a university, such as students and the culture around, or the organizational culture around the university, and the disconnect between the university and the economic landscape. So let's first address the aged growth model. Eric Weinstein suggests this problem with institutions called egos or embedded growth obligations reflect that institutions have and are ultimately subservient after a time towards this growth model. It means they're always working towards growth. Or relying on a sense of growth to stay relevant. I will say this is not an ill of blanket capitalism, but it's not smart capitalism. Capitalism, regardless of what far left wingers will tell you, is not all wrapped up in one box. There are certain ways that capitalism can be done. And if I may be so bold, blame can also be directed at, professors and public sector unions that essentially run employment at universities. I know. Saying this, especially as someone who works in academia, I understand. I get it. I'm almost, calling out the university professor itself, the professoriate itself, and the public sector unions that run it. I mean, in my ability to be as less hypocritical as possible, you got to call out the challenges when it's your own kind as well. Like I said, someone who is on the far left could easily look at this and say, oh yes, definitely a fault of that capitalist system. Even though universities in an economic sense are run through a model of socialism with all the with the union support in that sense, and centralized funds, you could arguably also say that it's a socialist model. But it is ultimately about this model of continual growth. I mean, we have lists called Sunshine Lists here in Canada that produce a list of names of individuals who make over $100,000 a year in the public sector. In any town Sunshine List, a large majority of those employees will be from the local university or college. I mean, go check it out yourself. If you type in your town or city Sunshine List, I guarantee a large majority will be government officials and tenured or unionized employees at the college or university. Along with that growth that the university wanted for their own inflated administration pensions or funds for professors, so too did the price of tuition rise, thus leading to a bubble, much like the housing bubble, a bubble that burst in the case of Laurentian. Second, the modern characteristics, of a university that we talk about, I introduced this question. What is the blank of a university degree? So what is the blank of a university degree? What certain words can fill in that blank? What is the meaning of a university degree? Well, it's to expand knowledge, of course. What is the process of a university degree? You can get literal with this. It depends on the program, but commonly 40 credit hours, 10 per year, equaling to 4 years. What is the role of a university degree? Most sensible answer to that, to earn some sense of societal capital in the workplace, to substantiate yourself in a job, in a sense, as a leader of society, so to speak. But the key question I want to use in this fill in the blank, what is the value of a university degree? What is the value of that university degree? This is a harder question to answer given the value of a university degree has changed, I would say, in the past few years. I mean, I had one professor, quite cynical, who stated that the master's degree is the new bachelor's degree, and that the bachelor's and associate's degree are essentially a short step ahead of high school graduates for the same position in the marketplace. What might this say about the characteristics of the university in relation to the students, teachers, administrators, and the organizational, culture around the universities? I'm just gonna come out and say it. There are many programs in universities that are marketed beautifully and provide a sense of excitement and exploration towards students, all while being economic graveyards for careers with no market allure. That's just the facts. I'm sorry, but it's just the facts. Certain degrees in certain fields pay more and provide more opportunity for graduates than others. But here's the kicker. They all cost relatively the same to enter. And this goes back to my first point on the growth model of universities and the economic model. How might I explain this? Let me use, I guess, an example to paint a picture in relation to the cultural characteristics of a university in relation to economic issues. Okay, so I'm going to use a real class in the university. Hold on, I'm just going to, I got to find it here. I'm going to pull it up 1 second. Okay. So, I'm going to say a real class that happens at a real university. This class is called Cultural Theory and Stuff, Seeing Culture Through Things. That is the actual name right now of a class. So let's use that class as a current example. This class has a professor who is tenured, let's say, and the yearly salary is $120,000. So $60,000 for a semester. Okay, there's going to be some math here, so try and follow along. This class is a part of a program that provides no workable skills for the job market and is more of an abstract discovery into, I guess, knowing and learning of a certain topic. Students are aware of this and decide with their $3,000 a semester tuition to engage in a different program or save money altogether and forego school. This class is taught in a way that welcomes focused learning and collaboration, so the professor caps it at 15 students. Based on previous circumstances of disengagement with the program, 7 decide to enroll in the first semester and 8 decide to enroll in the second semester. Now let's outline this math here pertaining to the economics of just one class. One teacher, paid $120,000, teaches a total of 15 students for the year at $3,000 tuition per student. Okay? An average undergrad student usually takes 5 classes, so the cost that they are paying for this class going towards this program is around $600. Therefore, you have a teacher making $120,000 with a total yearly student amount of 15 at $600 per student, equaling $9,000 in tuition fees for that class. Just for that class alone, $9,000 in tuition fees for that class. That right there is a $111,000 deficit for the university for one class. Okay? That is a large deficit. That is a massive deficit for 1 year for one class. So now, say we extrapolate that to the program with 2 tenured professors, 2 tenure track, and 1 adjunct or non-tenure track. Let's say the 2 tenured individuals are at $120,000 a year. 2 more that are tenure tracked, I guess, are at $105,000 a year, and the adjunct at $90,000. That's a total yearly salary for that program of $540,000, just in salaries alone. Now, we take the $9,000 for the one class. Let's say the other 2 are easy and get a full class, say with 30 students each semester with a lot of elective traffic. But the other 2 suffer enrollment on the same level. Student tuition fees for that class would equal roughly $100,000 in tuition revenue, so to speak. That's gross revenue. So $540,000 in salaries with $100,000 in tuition revenue for that program, leaves a net loss of $440,000. What you can see from the example is that this method is unsustainable, especially relating to professor salaries. Now, I know I'm just using kind of, general math here. University administration is a lot more complicated than that, but it's to provide you a sense of a picture that maybe it's not this bad, but there is definitely a clear deficit going on, especially with how salaries are paid and the amount of students that are coming in. One way schools make up this money is through the recruitment of international students who do not pay tax as international students, and this leads to higher tuition costs. And I don't mean higher as just in, slightly higher. I mean orders of magnitude higher. For example, this is for how they make up with the shortfall with international tuition. I mean, so if a domestic student pays $3,000 a year, an international student may pay up to $17,000 a year. So that's orders of magnitude higher than what a domestic student pays. So thus, if we substitute, let's say 16 of those domestic tuition students per semester, and we substitute it with international students, that brings the previous $100,000 tuition gross revenue to $189,000. Still short, but almost double. But the fact is they're still paying out $540,000 in salaries. Almost a $300,000 net loss rather than $440,000. So, I mean, I think if we look at this, more outwardly, what this pandemic has done along with the model of schooling is that even more international students are starting to see the value of their degree and the purpose for the higher tuition costs. Starting to see, when I was in school, a lot of, student protests that were going on with regard to international students and their fees. A large amount have moved online or have looked for other education methods instead of the Canadian universities, causing a large hole in the revenue stream regarding tuition. Thus, this leads to potential more long-term borrowing to cover costs, leading to more debt. Okay, there are three, I guess, kind of conclusive ideas that I have here with regard to universities. First, certain programs need to be dropped or removed or significantly underfunded in order to make up for the deficits they cause. I'm sorry, but if the program doesn't produce the market demands, they will not produce the demand in the classroom, leading to issues like this and like the example I provided earlier. The international student market is exploitative and incurs net negatives for most except for university administrators and professors, essentially. As administrators keep money flowing and professors keep their jobs, this is what the international model does. It hurts international students, adding on more to young professional debt to be incurred. Most international students cannot or do not stay in Canada, thus losing the potential for market enrichment, and it's hurting the access to the taxpayer and the domestic student, limiting access to education and potentially economic capital. Those are the problems with the international student market. I guarantee you, if you went to talk to a dean at a university, they would give you some form letter, why we embrace the international community. And yes, international students provide a meaningful substance on campus, but you have to also look at this in a nuanced way in that it hurts international students by adding more debt to them. Most international students do not stay in Canada, thus we lose a socioeconomic potential for market enrichment, and it hurts the taxpayer and domestic student, limiting access to education. So we need to have a serious talk about those issues, along with the issues around debits and credits relating to the university structure. And I'm looking right at the professor and administrative unions. This has to be a real discussion about sustainability, not some abstract discussion on sustainability, which is common in universities, as in some talk about sustainable initiatives from a UN summit that an administrator read once upon a time. Real discussion about sustainable action towards a capital mixed economy. Those discussions need to be had, and they need to be had quite soon. One of the third concepts that I wanted to talk about is that this leads to a disconnect to the economic landscape in a current society. I mean, look, there are certain careers and positions that have strong market characteristics through steady demand in society, as in the society demand makes certain positions strong for job placement in our market. This is simple socioeconomic analysis. There is a clear and present skills gap within our workplace and society today in Canada. I mean, this is backed up with statistics. I'll attach a link in the description. This gap in skills with job placement is an answer to the role of certain programs not providing the skills for employability or not meeting the social demand for careers. That is a problem that needs to be addressed because of the implications that come from it, such as students want to ensure that a university degree guarantees them at the very least a rewarding job, that they do not have to struggle to pay off their student loans, afford a mortgage, and provide food for themselves. You know, there are a lot of students out there who want to start their careers and maybe even buy a house, but, you know, currently the housing market and, you know, the amount of loans that they have to pay, there's the thought of even affording a mortgage is so beyond the pale. It's actually sad. I mean, no matter what a professor may tell you, these aspects have to be marketable in society, or the research that you do as a grad student needs to be applicable and create frameworks to be used in other research or in practicality. When this does not happen, we see instances like Laurentian where there is a shortfall of funds either from tuition during a pandemic, but a shortfall of tuition in programs that are marketable. With professor unions ensuring educators still get paid, in some cases inflated salaries, it is no wonder there is an insolvency crisis, and I'm not surprised it's only Laurentian. As the Globe and Mail article pointed out, there may be other universities. Now, I took the liberty myself to look at some other universities in Ontario. I'm wondering if I should share their names. But it's, you know what, it's all on public record. You can find them. You know what? There are publicly accessible documents. So, especially with regard to their funding and the debt that they incur. So, you know what? I did. I searched 4 universities just at random. I picked Windsor, Western York, and University of Ottawa. And all of them have debt that has raised year over year. Some have been able to keep the debt steady as a non-exponential growth. One has seen a sharp increase to almost Laurentian levels of $300 million in debt. How long does the refinancing last? How long can you incur this debt until you become insolvent? You know, at all universities over the past few years, while the debt was rising, more and more capital projects were happening, such as renovations on buildings, for example, even constructing entirely new buildings at the expense of millions and millions of dollars. I almost wonder, are those buildings, most of which remain empty and unusable even before the pandemic, are just used as illiquid assets to be sold off and to repay debt eventually in the future? I don't know, but perhaps a guest in the future that I can have on, like an economist or something that focuses on this, or some sort of accountant to describe this process, because even that would seem counterintuitive, right? You put all this money into structuring and creating a building, and then you just use it as liquid assets to be sold off to repay debt. You know, I guess the final takeaway that I have here is that there needs to be another way to manage universities. And this problem goes deeper than just COVID-19 being the cause, I would say. You know, there is talk about systemic issues in society right now. Trust me, I mentioned all this talk about systemic issues in episode 2, Woke Publishing. This is a real systemic issue. We have found one now. The model of current universities, and it needs to be addressed. So this is a real systemic issue as it proliferates seemingly through multiple universities. So I'll leave it at that. This section, of course, is watching and reading. Still reading The Parasitic Mind by Dr. Gad Saad. Very good and very insightful so far. Watching. I don't know. Maybe Django Unchained? The second best Christoph Waltz performance. Second only to Hans Landa in Inglourious Basterds, of course. So maybe, I'll watch Django and Inglourious. I don't know. That's a lot of movie. I don't know. We'll see how much time I have. Other than that, thank you very much for listening to this episode. Again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. With that said, thank you very much again. And the Academic Canuck signing off.